In this episode of Costume as Character, I spoke with Amy Parris, the costume designer on Yellowjackets Season 2. But before we get into that, if you want more Costume as Character videos, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. So very similarly to the conversation we had about The Last of Us and the usefulness of clothing in a sort of post-apocalyptic disaster scenario, a same thing is going on in Yellowjackets because you have a very finite wardrobe and these teenage girls are literally battling the elements. So they have to think very strategically about the use of every single piece of clothing and the way it's going to deteriorate in the elements. For example, you have Shauna, who makes use of a green jumper and turns it into a balaclava, and there's scenes where you can see the sleeves are tied in the back, around the back of her head.
Right. That was fun to get to do, to kind of like explore how you keep yourself warm, you know, and you want to keep your head warm. Obviously, you want to put your socks on your hands, keep your hands warm. But it was fun to get to explore like how creative you could be with like one sweater versus like one scarf and where the pieces would keep you the warmest. That was fun to get to do, just also knowing we needed to keep multiples in case a future season wants to bring it back for the next winter. Yeah. So it'd be creative with that.
Now that is in stark contrast to the sort of end-crazed cannibal scenes in which Misty's sort of creamy and striped colorful jumper has been turned into a balaclava with eye holes actually cut out of the fabric. That balaclava is never going to be a jumper again. Those girls are not concerned about keeping the integrity of their clothing to be used again in future. They've completely descended into the chaos of the wilderness. And that's a really key way that the use of costume shows the development of the characters throughout time. In particular, ahead of, I believe, episode 4, there were promotional stills that showed Lottie in Travis's jacket. And when I was in my Reddit hunting phases, I saw some really interesting theories about how the fact that Lottie's wearing Travis's jacket showed that Travis was moving his allegiance away from Natalie and toward Lottie. Now that is super interesting. But in actuality, when I spoke to Amy about it, what it actually is just that there's the warm coat.
Exactly. That's the warmest coat. So we knew we would want to have like a shared item that is our warmest coat. And it's on purpose meant to look super warm and not a part of the suitcases of the Yellowjackets that flew out there. So this is something the audience will, it'll be revealed to them in future episodes where the like origin of this jacket comes from. But the truth is, yeah, it's like their warmest coat. So whoever's going outside to get water or hunt or whatever they're doing is shared amongst them. So not only are like the pit pieces, so to speak, you know, like the balaclava sweater and stuff shared, but that jacket is also very specifically, intentionally like shared amongst them so that they could stay warm outside. And then it's, you know, a very fun plot reveal when we find out where that comes from.
Perhaps this season's most sad character is Coach Ben. Bless him. Poor Coach Ben. He's having a rough go of it. And in this season, he really starts to sort of disassociate from his current conundrum and imagine his life if he hadn't got on the plane, which, you know, is an interesting thought exercise. Probably not all that useful. What's interesting about this, there's two things in terms of Ben's costume and the world that he creates for himself that are really significant. And the first is that he's the only character who still consistently wears his Yellowjackets jacket. You do see the other girls wear it every once in a while, but Coach Ben is the one who's consistently in that outfit. He's wearing basically the clothes that he was wearing when the plane crashed. So he's really stuck in that moment, which obviously says something really big about the psyche of that character. And the other interesting thing is the way that he and his supporting characters are dressed in the fantasy world that he creates for himself. And when I spoke with Amy, she had a really sort of clear idea about the way that she wanted those scenes to look.
That was fun to get to do too, because these actors are in dirty clothes all day long, right? So the fitting where they get to like actually put on, you know, like vintage, and it is vintage nowadays, 90s clothing was really exciting. And so I was looking to sitcoms like Friends and Seinfeld, you know, the very classic, like puffy white sneakers and the stonewash denim with a tucked in button front shirt and a white tee, so we really kind of leaned into like the shiny sitcom fashion of it all, because it is a fantasy and it's like a facade. So as much as he can disassociate and go somewhere else, it should look almost like so perfect and pristine, because it's not real.
The big Yellowjackets season 2 scene that we were all waiting for, Cannibal Feast. It's such a compelling scene, in part because it's not really very gruesome. And the way they do that is by having the girls imagine themselves in this sort of like Greco-Roman feast, a kind of bacchanalian celebration of food and wine, and you see them eating strawberries and all sorts of different things. What was so compelling about that from a costume perspective was that Amy worked very hard to not tie it into any sort of specific era that these girls were imagining themselves in, but really they were just projecting the ultimate fantasy to escape the reality of what they were literally doing in that moment.
Yeah, that was so fast in the best way. I mean, it became like something that we talked about in a production meeting, and our director of that episode, Ben Sevenoff, who's wonderful, it kind of floated the idea of like, well, what if they're dressed for this, as opposed to it's just them disassociating while in the same clothes. So it was a daunting task to take on a TV schedule. So it wasn't as collaborative because there wasn't time to really talk about it. It was just like, hurry up and make. So the inspiration was sort of a Greek medieval Roman, mix, and it's not historically correct to anything specific. It's a fantasy. So yeah, each one is kind of just like imagining a beautiful sort of Grecian, Roman, medieval gown that they'd be in. Anything to not think about the fact that they're eating their friend. So, and to kind of like make it cohesive, it was nice to use a lot of like ivories and creams and golds, just so that at the dinner table it would look very like connected. But historically and like period wise, it's just a mix, just because it's fun to see it, to see these beautiful like floaty gowns. And again, the girls loved it because they weren't in dirty layered clothing. So it was fun to get to throw on some, gorgeous gowns for an episode.
It's also interesting because of the way in which it reflects on how the wardrobes themselves were built in our literal world, the work that Amy and her team had to undertake to create a wardrobe that is that limited. Again, we've talked about this before in shows like The Last of Us or even Poker Face. When you're dealing with a limited wardrobe, it actually forces you to be a little more creative. In the case of Yellowjackets, Amy was working with the concept of these clothes having to last the girls a very long time. And the constraints that puts on the actual wardrobe making team means that they have to make replicas of things that become distressed and have to dirty over time. And that's a lot of work.
Well, season 1, I think we all kind of collectively thought, well, maybe it could have been a little more. But when I first watched season 1, I thought, well, they definitely wanted to give season 2 somewhere to go, and to get dirtier. And up until I think 7, 8, they're still looking relatively clean-ish. I mean, they're dirty, but you'll really see like in 9 and 10, or sorry, in 9, they just get like roughed up. They really are like depraved and sad and desperate. And so it really starts kind of mellow and minor and goes a little crazy by the end, just so you could see the progression of how dirty and messy and gross and smelly they'd be at this point.
There's a few new characters for season 2. Everyone was super excited to see Elijah Wood show up as Walter. The first visual of him that we get is when he stealthily surprises Misty at the nursing home where she works. And there's a really great moment where the camera follows Misty's eye line, and being the thirsty girl that Misty is, I love Misty, it pans his body, which was really a nice kind of little And there's a moment where when the camera gets real low, you see that he's wearing these shorts and these trainers with these kind of maroon, I think, looking socks. And it's just such a weird outfit. But actually, there was a really, really interesting reason as to why Amy dressed him the way that she did.
What we don't know about Walter until later, when it's revealed in the script that he tells her he has a ton of money. So we wanted him to be kind of unassuming, but there's also a script note that he has nice calves and that Misty clocks that. So the best way to show that off would be, in shorts, and then to accentuate it with like a solid color sock. So I think he's the kind of guy that, much like Misty, she's very calculated in how she chooses to present herself to the world and tries to avoid anything too on trend or anything that might be too outrageous to be made fun of. So I think the way Elijah, or Walter's character, is, he would want like a fun sock, but he wouldn't want one that's so splashy and in your face, like someone might make a comment about it or bring too much attention to himself. So he just does like solid colors instead. But he's like a shorts guy, and you know how there's always somebody who can just wear shorts in any temperature. So we kind of wanted that to be Walter for a while. And it's funny because Elijah and I kind of kept saying, let's just keep Walter weird, like let's keep it weird, because it's better to not assume that you know who he is by his clothes. It's sort of unassuming, and it's a great way to keep him kind of undercover at first. So that was fun to get to mix in like vintage and just weird stuff I found at a thrift store with like weird lengths. There's like a jacket that's like 3/4 sleeve and almost like a almost 70s long collar. It's just like a woven, like woven cotton little like zip front jacket, but it fit him great and was just peculiar. So we were looking for things that were specifically weird, just to keep Walter weird.
We learn, as Amy said, that he actually has a lot of money, and yet he doesn't dress in a way that reveals that. But in a way he also does, because there's a little bit of a tension, not only within the show, but also more broadly in society, of the ways in which you signify wealth through clothes. And one of the conversations people have a lot now is around the theme of quiet luxury, and the idea that actually the way that you display your wealth is by not displaying your wealth, but actually by having these really well-tailored, very high quality fabric clothing items that don't scream, Balenciaga labels or whatever it might be, but that you're dressing in a way that to others who know will signify that you have money, versus Elijah Wood Walter's sort of quirky eccentricisms. And because he's wealthy enough, he can buy the vintage pieces that fit him better. He can afford to buy the things that show off that eccentricity in a way that feels still a little more tailored than if you or I went down to the Goodwill and tried to do the same thing. It just wouldn't quite look the same. What's interesting about that in comparison to another Yellowjackets character is grown-up Lottie.
Yeah, and she's so different as well to her community, like her intentional community. And that was intentional to keep her different. And it was really great because Simone Cassell, who plays adult Lottie, is super collaborative. So I first thought, well, the cult leader would also be in purple. But much like a lot of cult leaders that don't always practice what they preach, she's not in the heliotrope purple that's community dyed collectively. They're all getting their clothes from a thrift store and dunking them in a community dye bath. Along with her Rolex, she's probably having stuff custom made or finding like unique designer pieces that she wants to wear to stand out. And she really does. Like, we've got these gorgeous colors on her that really bounce, against the purple of her community and her world. So super intentional to make her stand out, to look different, and to just feel like so different from the other adults that we've started to know, because it makes you wonder what's happened in the space in between. We're starting to see glimpses of that, where we see her go to like a mental hospital in Switzerland, and the idea was Switzerland is not in the States, and so they really had to like reach further than their local psychiatrist office and stuff just to try to get her help because she was that far gone. So I liked the idea of like trying to fill in the blanks of like what's happening in between the youth and the adult versions of themselves. So there's a lot to be discovered between that timeline.
In most of the episodes we've seen so far, she's wearing yellows, kind of like mustardy, burnt orange, red, these very sort of fiery, vibrant colors. And again, she's in these very well-tailored, drapey, silky things that don't look oversized or baggy, but are flowy in a way that makes her almost Messiah-like, right? She has this very sort of draped, ethereal presence, which she also does as a teenage girl in season 1. She's wearing this kind of pink Angora fluffy sweater in one of the early episodes that is a very starkly different to the way all the other girls are dressed. So Lottie is already setting herself apart from the get-go, and then now as an adult. The use of color is even more interesting though, because as Lottie develops throughout season 2, her color palette changes. And it's really apparent when she switches from these sort of reds and oranges and these very earthy, fiery colors to this sort of striking blue-green, similarly draped outfit. And I asked Amy about her sort of intentionality around switching up those colors.
Yeah, and the idea of just playing with color, it gets just a pinch darker while it's bright. She hadn't done blue yet, and so we just liked the idea of like her descent into madness could also be like shown through color. And so there's just a quick turn where suddenly she's like in these bluer shades, and then as you watch the further seasons, you'll get to see where she goes next. So it's fun to get to play with that, within color theory on the actual garments. And because it is so specific, it's often not something we can just find. We were shooting in Vancouver, and you're dealing with not only a quick schedule for television, but you're dealing with like shipping and the issue of getting stuff in time for a fitting. So the fitting room would sometimes have unfinished pieces. Like we would find great fabrics and just know we could make something out of it. And that actual blue green ombre piece almost has a feathered print to it. I had that in the fitting because I felt like it was so special. And so then we would drape it on her and just kind of see what felt right as far as like where it would land and how much we were exposing and showing, because she's also quite vulnerable when you see her arms and stuff. So sometimes the pieces are, kind of like put together on the body just because then you can see how they feel in it. And it's so important that they feel the character physically as well. So about half of her wardrobe was custom built because some of those pieces you just can't find out in the world readily available in that easy. And it was nice to just use really unique special fabrics that we found, whether in Vancouver or other, areas that were shipped to us.
Similarly to the way that Lottie's outfits reflect her internal mental health and emotional state, we also see that really clearly with adult Van, who's another new character for season 2. And Amy was very specific about the ways in which Van dresses not only to address the literal physical scars that she carries from her time in the wilderness, but also the emotional ones as well.
Adult Van is wearing a mock collar. I mean, she does have a scar on her face, but her armor can kind of be seen a little bit more through her clothing and as protection. Whereas, like you said, Lottie is a little bit more loose. And so you think she's really got it together, and you can assume like, well, she's really recovered and she's really now trying to help other people. And then as you watch these episodes, you see that's not the case at all. In fact, she's spiraling out of control.
Now, Shauna is sort of one of our linchpins for the show. She's really the character through whom we are experiencing a lot of the emotions of the other characters in the world that we're in. As an adult, Shauna's, to my mind, one of the only characters who isn't dressing in a way that reflects or expresses her internal sort of strife and makeup and emotions. She's really dressing as a mom who has a teenage daughter that she has to corral and a husband whose job is kind of fledgling, and it's much more about comfort and practicality than it is saying anything about who she is. But actually, that's also purposeful.
And I think that makes her even more terrifying. Like you kind of want her to just feel like a mom, and not to say moms dress boring by any means, but you want her to feel unassuming so that when you do see that she's capable of holding a gun to like the auto shop owner and telling him what it feels like to like tear someone's skin off, like you don't want to look at somebody dressed in like a leather jacket and be like, oh, of course she would do that. You want to look at someone that's dressed very kind of simply and then be terrified that they actually could do that.
One of the characters who has the greatest disconnect between her teenage self and her adult self is Taissa. Now, obviously, she is having an internal disconnect within herself, literally. Her personalities are developing, shall we say. We haven't really had anything confirmed about if she has a mental health diagnosis or not, but there's obviously some sort of disassociation happening with her that is actually reflected in the way she dresses in a really clever way. Now, I had the pleasure of speaking with Jenny Egan about Knives Out, and one of the things that we talked about was dressing Catherine Hahn's Politician in a kind of politician's beige. And the idea that what that does is it allows her constituents to read whatever they want into her because her outfit is very neutral. It's sort of doing the opposite with Taissa. It's not so much that she wants other people to project onto her, even though she is also a politician. It's more that she doesn't have anything internally to project outwards. So she's not dressing in a way that says something about who she is or what she wants or what her needs are, because she doesn't really know what that is.
And to speak on like the cream outfit, like that was something that just felt like so like absent of color and pattern and just like so vacant, which is kind of how she's feeling when she's lost her child, separating from her wife and all the stuff that she's going through. So I'm kind of connecting this to your bullet point question about young Taissa and how I didn't really connect the younger version of herself with her older version in any way with costumes, because I feel like just like the bad version of herself, they're so separate. So it leads you to wonder, like, again, what's been happening in between their timelines, and knowing that this is a recurrence of the bad one only recently, and you're just so confused with, like, is she the good one now? Is she the bad one? I mean, the whole thing about her kind of splitting personalities and stuff is such a unique storyline. So there's no real connection between the young version and the older version of herself there, but it was fun to get to connect the plaids, between like Shauna, and definitely see that that is a comfort sort of comfort item that she goes to, is like a nice, like woven up, a nice woven button-up shirt, so to speak, like kind of almost that grunge and influenced by music look. So she would definitely stick to that even as an adult.
I really enjoyed speaking with Amy about her work on Yellowjackets Season 2, and hope that you also enjoyed this conversation. Please let us know your wildest Yellowjackets fan theories in the comments. If there's something that you think we left out, let us know. If there's other designers you'd like us to speak to or shows you want us to talk about, please let us know in the comments. Also, please like the video. It really helps us out. Thank you so much for watching.